Racist store manager kicks out Snoop Dogg, but what happened next shocked everyone. The bell above the store door jingled as Snoop Dogg walked in, his signature style of cool and relaxed confidence instantly noticeable. He adjusted his hoodie as he stepped into the store, the smell of polished wood and fresh merchandise filling the air. It was a small boutique, high-end, with an air of exclusivity, but Snoop didn't care. He wasn't there for the glitz or the glamour, just a little peace and quiet. As he walked through the aisles, browsing through the neatly arranged shelves, he could feel the eyes of the employees on him. Snoop was used to the stares, the whispers, the shock. It came with the territory of being who he was. He didn't mind. What bothered him, however, was the feeling that something wasn't right in the store. From the corner of his eye, he noticed the store manager, a man in his early 40s, standing at the counter. The manager's gaze shifted to him, lingering just a moment too long, a subtle sneer playing at the edge of his lips. Snoop raised an eyebrow, but didn't let it bother him. He had other things on his mind. It wasn't until he reached the back of the store, admiring a set of finely crafted watches, that he felt the tap on his shoulder. He turned around slowly, only to find the manager standing there with an expression that was anything but welcoming. "Can I help you with something?" The manager's voice was laced with an edge, like he was trying to hide something, but couldn't quite manage it. Snoop met his gaze coolly. "Nah, I'm just looking around." The manager didn't seem satisfied with that answer. His lips tightened, and he glanced quickly to his employees, as if making sure they were watching. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Snoop blinked in disbelief, not sure if he had heard him correctly. "Excuse me?" he said, his voice calm but edged with confusion. "You heard me," the manager repeated, his voice hardening. "I said you need to leave." His eyes flicked to Snoop's hoodie, the oversized style that was clearly not the store's image, before looking back at him. Snoop stood frozen for a moment. He had experienced plenty of unpleasant interactions in his career, but this was something else. It wasn't just an awkward exchange. This was something intentional, something deeper. "What's the problem?" Snoop asked, his voice still steady, but a little more serious now. "I'm just here to browse, man." The manager's face flushed with irritation. "You don't belong here." It was a clear statement, loaded with implications. The atmosphere in the store grew tense, and Snoop could feel the stares of the other customers shifting to him. Some were uncomfortable, others tried to pretend like they hadn't noticed what was happening. But Snoop, ever the master of composure, just smiled. He didn't let the manager's words get to him. Instead, he turned to face the exit, ready to walk out, but not without one final comment. "I guess this is how y'all run things here, huh?" Snoop said, his voice now carrying a note of quiet disbelief. "You're telling me I'm not welcome just because of what I look like?" The manager's eyes narrowed, but he didn't respond. Snoop could feel the weight of the moment. He knew what had just happened, and he wasn't about to let it slide. As he walked out of the store, his mind was a swirl of thoughts, but one thing was clear: something needed to be done about this. It didn't take long for word to spread. Within minutes, the entire city knew about the incident, thanks to Snoop's social media. A post went up with a simple caption: "This is how they treat me at that boutique. I won't stand for it." The accompanying video showed Snoop's encounter with the manager, his calm and collected demeanor in stark contrast to the aggression he had been met with. The post went viral, shared by thousands within hours. Comments flooded in from fans and supporters, all expressing outrage at the manager's behavior. They rallied behind Snoop, calling for a boycott of the store and demanding an apology from the manager. As the post gained traction, the boutique's reputation started to crumble. People began boycotting not just the store, but also spreading the word about how Snoop was treated. And Snoop wasn't going to let it rest. He took to social media again, this time calling for action. "I want to let everyone know that this type of behavior won't stand." Snoop wrote, his voice unwavering. "It's not about me, it's about all of us. People need to be treated with respect, no matter who they are or where they come from." The backlash was swift and intense. Within hours, news outlets picked up the story, and the boutique was inundated with negative reviews, with many accusing the store of racism and discrimination. But Snoop's message wasn't just about the store. He had something bigger in mind: the fight for equality and respect for everyone, no matter their background, their appearance, or their status. The next day, the store manager issued a public statement. "We regret the incident that occurred with one of our customers yesterday. We deeply apologize for the way the situation was handled and for the offense caused. We are committed to ensuring this does not happen again." But the apology, though sincere, was too little too late. The damage had been done. The store's doors were closed for the foreseeable future, and employees were reassigned to other locations. In the wake of the incident, Snoop received messages of support from all corners of the world. Celebrities, politicians, activists, and everyday people came forward to express their solidarity with him. Some even took to their own social media platforms to share their own stories of discrimination, showing that Snoop's experience was unfortunately not isolated. One person in particular stood out. The CEO of a large corporation, someone who had been following the story, reached out to Snoop personally. "I've seen your message," the CEO said in a private message, "and I want to make sure this issue is addressed. Would you be interested in working with us to launch a campaign for equality and inclusion?" Snoop, though humbled by the offer, knew that this was only the beginning. The real work had only just begun. Together with the CEO, they began planning a nationwide campaign to combat racism and promote inclusivity in all industries. The campaign kicked off with a powerful video that featured Snoop and the CEO, along with other influential figures, speaking out about the importance of unity and respect for all people. The message was clear: racism had no place in their world. And as the movement grew, so did Snoop's resolve. He had started a conversation that couldn't be silenced, one that would resonate for years to come. As the days passed, the momentum surrounding the incident at the boutique only grew. What had begun as a personal affront to Snoop Dogg had quickly transformed into a rallying cry for people across the country who had experienced similar injustices. The hashtag Snoop deserves respect was trending everywhere, and it was clear that this wasn't going to be a fight that would fade away quietly. The news outlets continued to cover the backlash against the boutique, but now, the story was being reframed. It was no longer about a single encounter between a celebrity and a store manager. It had become a conversation about systemic prejudice and the need for change, especially in retail and customer service environments. Snoop had become a symbol for this cause, not because of his celebrity status, but because of the calm and calculated way he handled the situation. He wasn't the angry figure that many people expected, but rather someone who chose to use his platform to amplify the voices of those who had been silenced for too long. As Snoop worked to spread his message, he began collaborating with organizations that focused on social justice and racial equality. Together, they formulated plans to hold retailers accountable, pushing for diversity training programs for all employees and better methods of handling customer complaints without resorting to racial profiling. In the wake of the incident, Snoop's social media channels exploded with messages of support. People from all walks of life, Black, white, Latino, Asian, came forward to tell their stories of discrimination, some of them sharing moments of deep hurt and others showing their resilience in the face of adversity. One story in particular stood out: a single mother who had been discriminated against at a fast food restaurant. She'd been treated unfairly because of her appearance and her socioeconomic status. The post she shared, accompanied by the hashtag Snoop deserves respect, quickly garnered thousands of likes and comments from others who had experienced similar treatment. The mother's story resonated deeply with Snoop, and it spurred him to take even greater action. He knew that the changes needed to be more than just symbolic. They needed to come with real, lasting solutions. Soon, Snoop was in talks with city officials, advocating for legislation that would protect consumers from racial discrimination in retail spaces. He didn't just want people to share their stories. He wanted to change the system that allowed these injustices to occur in the first place. The corporate world, too, began to take notice. Major brands and retailers who had remained silent in the face of public outrage started reaching out to Snoop, asking how they could contribute to the conversation. Many of them had already begun their own internal reviews, looking for ways to improve diversity, equity, and inclusion practices. But even with all the positive attention Snoop was receiving, he never lost sight of what mattered most to him: the people. He wanted to use his newfound influence to make a tangible difference in the lives of everyday folks who had been let down by the system. One of the first major wins in the campaign came when the CEO of a large department store chain reached out to him personally. They offered to fund a nationwide initiative aimed at providing job opportunities to underrepresented communities. The initiative would focus on training programs, mentorship, and career development to help individuals who had faced discrimination in the workforce. Snoop's voice was instrumental in getting the CEO to take this step, and he was proud to see the direct impact it had on those in need. The initiative was just the beginning, though. Snoop and his team began working on a series of community-based events that would bring together people from different backgrounds to engage in dialogue about discrimination and inequality. These events, held across the country, allowed everyday people to share their experiences and discuss potential solutions in an open, safe space. At each event, Snoop was there, listening, engaging, and sharing his vision for a more inclusive world. The impact of these conversations was undeniable. People were empowered by the knowledge that their voices were being heard, and that together, they could spark real change. Then came the unexpected. In the middle of one of these events, as Snoop addressed a group of young people about their power to make a difference, he was approached by a woman who had been silently watching from the back. She had been a manager at the boutique where the incident had occurred. With tears in her eyes, she apologized to Snoop, expressing her regret for her role in the incident. She explained that she had been raised in an environment where stereotypes were ingrained, but after hearing Snoop's message and witnessing the profound effect it had on others, she felt compelled to make amends. "I was wrong," she said, her voice trembling. "I know that now. I want to be part of the solution." Snoop, ever the embodiment of grace and understanding, accepted her apology. "It takes a lot of courage to admit when you're wrong," he said, "and it takes even more courage to change. I appreciate you being here today. Let's move forward together, and let's keep spreading the message of respect and love." The woman's act of contrition became a turning point in the campaign. It showed that change could happen, even when people didn't start out on the right foot. It was a reminder that redemption was possible, and that people were capable of growth, even in the most difficult circumstances. The momentum continued to build, and soon enough, major companies, government agencies, and even schools were adopting the practices and values that Snoop had been championing. Diversity and inclusion became the focal points of corporate initiatives, with new programs and policies being introduced at an unprecedented rate. But for Snoop, the work wasn't done. He knew that real change took time, and that the fight for equality would always be ongoing. The awareness had been raised, but now it was about sustaining the effort and making sure that the work was carried on by future generations. And so, with every new partnership, every new initiative, and every new voice added to the chorus of support, Snoop continued to push for a world where everyone, regardless of race, background, or identity, was treated with the respect and dignity they deserved. In the end, it wasn't just about what happened in that boutique. It was about the larger movement that came from it, the unity that was sparked by Snoop's calm strength, and the countless people whose lives were changed for the better. It was about a future where respect wasn't a luxury, it was a right. As the campaign continued to spread across the nation, Snoop received invitations from universities, community organizations, and even international leaders. People from all walks of life wanted to hear his message, learn from his experience, and join the movement that was reshaping the way society approached racism and inequality. At one event, he stood before an audience of young people at a prominent university, speaking about the importance of allyship in the fight for racial justice. His words resonated deeply, especially when he shared stories from his own life, stories of how he had witnessed and experienced discrimination, yet had chosen to rise above it, using his platform to create change instead of allowing anger and resentment to take hold. He spoke candidly about his own journey of growth. "I didn't start out perfect," he said. "None of us are. But we have to look at ourselves, face the truth, and do the work. We can't wait for others to change. We have to lead the way." The audience, which consisted mainly of students, listened intently. Many of them had never heard a figure like Snoop speak so openly about race, responsibility, and redemption. His honesty struck a chord with them, and the room was filled with a sense of hope that, despite the challenges, they had the power to make a difference. In the months that followed, Snoop continued to collaborate with the organizations he had partnered with, expanding his influence and impact. His public appearances, once focused solely on his music and entertainment career, were now centered around his activism and commitment to fighting inequality. Corporate leaders began to take notes. Companies that had once been reluctant to take a stand on issues of social justice were now actively seeking out partnerships with Snoop's organizations. They wanted to align themselves with the positive message he was spreading. Many even started launching their own diversity initiatives in the workplace, offering scholarships and mentorship programs to young people of color. But even as the movement gained momentum, there were those who attempted to dismiss Snoop's work, claiming that he was simply using his fame for personal gain. Snoop was unfazed by these critics. He knew that true change wasn't about seeking accolades. It was about creating lasting systems that would benefit generations to come. In response to the critics, he continued to advocate for transparency in the corporate world. If they really care about change, they'll show it with action, Snoop said. You can't just talk the talk, you've got to walk the walk. And that means actually making space for people of all backgrounds and making real investments in the communities that need it most. The public reaction was mixed, but the dialogue Snoop was starting was undeniable. The stories of success continued to pour in, from the community organizers who had received funding for their grassroots efforts, to the employees in major corporations who were now being mentored by leaders who had once been inaccessible. There were visible signs of progress. One of the most moving moments in the campaign came when Snoop visited a community center in a city he had grown up near. The center had been struggling for years, fighting for resources to support at-risk youth. But with Snoop's help, it had been transformed. The walls were adorned with murals celebrating diversity, and the children attending the after-school programs were now getting the tools they needed to succeed in school and beyond. As Snoop walked through the center, he was greeted with cheers and applause. The young people who had benefited from the programs came up to him, expressing their gratitude for his support. One young woman, whose life had been turned around by the mentorship program, said, "You gave us hope. You showed us that we could be something more than what the world said we would be." For Snoop, moments like this were what made all the hard work worth it. He wasn't just creating a movement, he was changing lives. And he knew that this was just the beginning. As the years passed, Snoop continued his efforts. But now he had more allies by his side. People who had once been on the sidelines were now stepping forward, eager to make their own contributions. Politicians, educators, business owners, and even celebrities, everyone had a role to play in the fight for equality. The next phase of the movement was about education. Snoop and his team began to partner with schools and universities across the country to implement curriculum changes. They wanted to make sure that young people weren't just learning about history, they were learning about how to build a better future. "I don't want kids to grow up with the same limitations that I did," Snoop explained in an interview. "We need to teach them to think critically, to question everything, and to understand that their voices matter. When they grow up, I want them to be ready to create the kind of world that's just and equal for everyone." And it wasn't just about academics. Snoop also pushed for more arts programs in schools, believing that creative expression was a powerful tool for change. "Art tells the stories that textbooks can't," he said. "It helps us connect to each other on a deeper level. That's why we need more spaces for young people to express themselves." The initiative to bring more arts programs to schools gained widespread support, and soon enough, art shows, music festivals, and dance performances began taking place in communities that had once been neglected. These events brought people from different walks of life together, and the creative energy that filled the air was palpable. As the movement grew, the language around race and privilege began to shift. Terms like systemic racism and intersectionality became part of everyday conversations, and more people, particularly in the corporate world, began to recognize the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion in their workplaces. But despite all the success, Snoop never allowed himself to get comfortable. He knew that there was still much work to be done. "We've made progress," he said in a speech at a major conference on racial justice, "but we can't stop now. "There's still so much more to do. The fight is far from over. And I won't stop until every single person, no matter where they come from or what they look like, has the opportunity to thrive." His words left the audience in awe, reminding them all of the road ahead. Snoop had proven that one person, no matter their background or status, could indeed change the world. But he also made it clear that the work was never done. It was a lifelong journey, and it required everyone's participation. And so, Snoop continued on his path, using his voice, his platform, and his influence to drive change. He remained committed to the cause, knowing that, together, they could create a world that was truly equal, where respect wasn't just a lofty ideal, but a fundamental right for all. As Snoop's influence continued to spread, he started receiving more invitations to speak at international events. His message of unity, empowerment, and systemic change was resonating with people all over the globe. The stories he shared, the challenges he had overcome, and his unapologetic stance on standing up for justice became an inspiration to many. Soon, he was invited to speak in Europe, Africa, and Latin America, where the conversations about racism and inequality were equally pressing. On one of his international trips, Snoop found himself in Johannesburg, South Africa, addressing a crowd of young activists who were committed to ending racial inequality in their communities. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Snoop had come to be known not only as a cultural icon but as a global advocate for change. His words carried weight. He had seen both sides of the struggle and had successfully used his platform to make a difference. In Johannesburg, he was met with an overwhelming sense of gratitude. People were eager to hear about how he had managed to use his position in the entertainment industry to launch a campaign for racial justice. During the event, Snoop didn't hold back. He shared candid stories about his own experiences with systemic racism, how he had struggled to navigate the entertainment industry while facing obstacles that others didn't have to contend with. "What I went through in the music industry is nothing compared to what many of you face every day," Snoop said, his voice steady but powerful. "But we can't let it break us. You keep pushing, you keep striving. The power's in your hands. If I can make it, so can you." The crowd erupted in applause, and for Snoop, it was another defining moment in his journey of activism. It wasn't just about his past or his success. It was about showing the next generation that change was possible and that they were capable of leading the charge. The impact of that speech was far-reaching. For weeks afterward, Snoop received messages from young people in South Africa who had been inspired by his words. They felt seen. They felt heard. And more importantly, they felt empowered to make a difference in their own communities. Back in the United States, Snoop continued to build partnerships with organizations that were making tangible progress in the fight for justice. One such organization, Voices for Change, was dedicated to providing resources and legal support to marginalized communities who face discrimination in the criminal justice system. Snoop lent his voice and support to their efforts, helping to fund programs that offered legal representation to those who couldn't afford it. In addition to his involvement with grassroots organizations, Snoop also began to focus more on legislative change. He started working closely with lawmakers, urging them to pass bills that would address systemic issues in education, healthcare, and housing, areas where inequality was most prevalent. At a meeting with a group of progressive legislators in Washington, D.C., Snoop presented his vision for a comprehensive reform package. It was bold, it was ambitious, and it was what the country needed to move toward true equity. "We can't keep talking about change without making it happen," he said, standing before a room full of lawmakers. "We've seen the effects of decades of inaction. It's time to step up. We need to make real changes to the policies that have held people back for too long." His words were met with nods of agreement, and many of the legislators present were eager to work with him on pushing the reform package forward. Snoop's influence had now transcended entertainment. He was being taken seriously as a changemaker, and his ability to unite people from different walks of life was helping to bridge divides in Washington. Through his tireless work, Snoop began to see the shift he had longed for. More people were speaking out. More people were standing up for what was right. The movement was gaining momentum, and Snoop was proud to be a part of it. One day, As Snoop was walking through a community center that he had helped to fund, he was approached by a young girl named Maya. She had been attending the after-school programs that Snoop's organization had established, and she wanted to thank him for making such a difference in her life. "I don't know where I'd be if it wasn't for this place," Maya said, her eyes shining with gratitude. "You gave me hope. You showed me that I could be somebody. I want to help others like you've helped me." Maya's words left Snoop speechless. This was why he did what he did. It wasn't for accolades or recognition. It was for moments like this, when he could see the direct impact his work was having on the next generation. "I'm proud of you, Maya," Snoop said, his voice full of emotion. "You're the future. Keep doing what you're doing, and never let anyone tell you that you can't achieve your dreams." As Maya walked away, Snoop realized just how far his journey had come. From being a young man trying to navigate the music industry, to now being a global leader in the fight for racial justice, he had come a long way. But there was still so much more to do. Despite the progress that had been made, Snoop knew that the battle wasn't over. There were still barriers to break, policies to change, and hearts and minds to shift. But with the support of so many others, he felt more determined than ever to keep pushing forward. And so, Snoop's campaign continued. His work was far from finished. But with every step he took, he was closer to realizing his ultimate goal, a world where racial injustice no longer had a place, where every individual, regardless of their background, had an equal shot at success. He knew that this journey would never be easy, but it was a journey worth taking. Because the fight for justice was not just his, it was everyone's. As he reflected on his journey, Snoop thought about the words of a mentor who had once told him, "You may never see the full impact of your work, but trust that you're planting seeds for future generations." And with that, Snoop realized that his work would live on long after he was gone. With renewed energy and focus, Snoop pressed on. The road ahead was still long, but he knew that he was not walking it alone. As time went on, Snoop's influence continued to grow, but he remained grounded in his mission. While many admired his celebrity status, he always used his platform to speak out against the injustices that plagued marginalized communities. The road to change was never simple, but it was one that Snoop had now firmly committed himself to walking. The media attention around his activism didn't go unnoticed by others in the entertainment industry. Snoop's fellow musicians, actors, and artists began reaching out to show their support, either through public endorsements or by donating to his cause. More celebrities, both established and rising, joined him in using their visibility to shine a spotlight on social issues that too often went ignored. One particular collaboration Snoop cherished was with a group of young hip-hop artists who shared his passion for social justice. They formed a collective, and together, they launched a campaign called Voice of the Voiceless. The campaign's goal was to amplify the stories of those affected by inequality and to support efforts that directly impacted their lives, from advocating for better healthcare to improving access to education. While the collective garnered significant attention, it wasn't just about raising awareness. It was about taking tangible steps toward creating change. Snoop, with his network of influential contacts, helped to secure partnerships with organizations that were already working on the front lines, from providing housing assistance to mentoring programs for at-risk youth. With this increased momentum, Snoop's message reached new audiences. Schools and universities began to invite him to speak, not just about his own life story, but about how young people could make a difference in the world around them. It was at a university in Los Angeles that Snoop held one of his most poignant speeches. The crowd was diverse, filled with students from different backgrounds, immigrants, first-generation students, those from low-income neighborhoods, and those who had experienced racism in their lives. "Y'all got a chance to change this world," Snoop began, his voice steady, "but you gotta believe in yourselves. They're gonna try to tell you that you're nothing. They'll try to make you feel like you don't belong. But you do. And that's the first step. Recognizing that you belong here, and your voice matters." It wasn't just a speech, it was a call to action. Snoop encouraged students to channel their anger into activism, to use their creativity, their platforms, their voices to demand the change they wanted to see. His words resonated deeply with the young people in the audience, many of whom had faced obstacles that seemed insurmountable. But for the first time, they realized that they didn't have to accept the limitations that society placed on them. The years rolled on, and Snoop's influence reached even further. He became an advocate not just for racial justice but for a broader set of issues: climate change, poverty alleviation, and equal rights for all. His commitment to these causes led him to work alongside global leaders and activists, all of whom shared his vision of a better future. The work was long and there were still setbacks, but the progress he saw, bit by bit, gave him hope. One of the proudest moments in Snoop's career came when he was asked to give the keynote address at the United Nations. It wasn't just a recognition of his work, it was a symbol of how far his message had gone. It marked a moment when a man who had once been considered just a rapper and entrepreneur was now a recognized global leader for social change. In his speech at the UN, Snoop focused on the urgency of the moment. He spoke passionately about the need for world leaders to take immediate action on climate change, stressing the impact it would have on the world's most vulnerable communities. He also continued his call for racial justice, noting that people of color, particularly in poorer countries, were often the most affected by environmental degradation and economic inequality. The applause that followed was deafening, and Snoop knew that his work was far from over. But in that moment, surrounded by diplomats and world leaders, he realized that he had accomplished something far beyond what he had ever imagined. Change don't happen overnight, but if we keep pushing, Snoop said as he concluded his speech, we're gonna see a world that works for all of us, not just the few. Back in the United States, Snoop's efforts to reform the criminal justice system continued to yield results. He worked with legal experts and lawmakers to pass legislation aimed at reducing mass incarceration. His most notable achievement in this area was the passage of a bill that would expand parole opportunities for nonviolent offenders and provide them with education and job training upon release. The bill wasn't a magic solution to the issues facing the criminal justice system, but it was a step in the right direction. It represented the kind of pragmatic, compassionate change that Snoop had been advocating for years. As Snoop continued to work on these pressing issues, he also began to focus on his legacy. He realized that for all the success he had achieved, there was still so much more he wanted to accomplish. He started mentoring a new generation of activists, hoping to impart the lessons he had learned along the way: how to navigate the complexities of the systems they were fighting against, how to build coalitions, and, most importantly, how to maintain hope in the face of adversity. One of the young people who benefited from Snoop's mentorship was a woman named Jada, an up-and-coming activist who had been inspired by his work. Jada had grown up in a neighborhood similar to Snoop's own, and like him, she had seen the struggles that young people in her community faced. She had a natural ability to connect with people and was driven by a deep sense of justice. Jada became one of Snoop's closest allies in his work, and together, they launched a national campaign to address the school-to-prison pipeline. The campaign focused on reforming disciplinary policies in schools that disproportionately targeted students of color, pushing for more restorative justice practices and better access to mental health resources for young people. Every student deserves the chance to thrive, Jada said during the launch of the campaign. We have to change the system that's been failing them for decades. The campaign gained traction quickly, and soon, it was at the forefront of national discussions about education reform. More and more schools began implementing restorative practices, and a growing number of young people started to see that their future wasn't determined by the mistakes they had made in the past. Looking back on his journey, Snoop couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. His rise from a young man trying to make it in the entertainment world to a global leader for social change was nothing short of extraordinary. But he knew that the true measure of his success wouldn't be found in accolades or awards, it would be in the lasting impact he had on the world. With the next generation of activists carrying the torch, Snoop felt confident that the work he had started would continue long after he was gone. The struggle for justice, equality, and fairness would always be a part of the human story, but with each passing day, it became clearer that the future was in good hands. Never stop fighting, Snoop often said, because the world ain't gonna change unless we keep pushing for it. As the campaign for education reform progressed, Snoop's collaboration with Jada blossomed into a dynamic partnership. They were a force to be reckoned with, their combined experience in the world of activism and advocacy making them a formidable team. Snoop, with his wisdom and experience, guided Jada, while she brought fresh energy and innovative ideas to the table. The media attention surrounding their campaign was overwhelming. Interviews, press conferences, and public appearances filled their schedules. They became a symbol of change, a reminder that, no matter how entrenched systems of oppression might seem, they could be challenged, dismantled, and rebuilt. Snoop found himself more and more in demand as a speaker. He was invited to universities, conferences, and even corporate boardrooms, where he spoke not just about his own life but about the bigger issues facing society. The media may have initially viewed him as a rapper-turned-activist, but over time, they began to recognize the depth of his understanding of social issues. His authenticity and commitment were impossible to ignore. One of Snoop's most memorable speaking engagements took place at a major tech conference, where he was invited to discuss the intersection of technology and social justice. The event was packed with some of the world's most powerful entrepreneurs, innovators, and tech giants. It was a room full of people who had the resources and influence to make real change, and Snoop was determined to make sure they understood the importance of using their platforms for good. "Y'all got the power to make some real change," Snoop told the crowd, his voice steady and commanding. But that power comes with a responsibility. If you can build a billion-dollar app, you can use that same creativity to build a better world. It's all about what you choose to focus on. He didn't mince words, telling the audience that the tech industry had a unique opportunity to address social inequalities, whether it was by increasing diversity within their companies or by developing technologies that could help marginalized communities. Snoop's words weren't just motivational, they were a call to action. After the speech, Snoop received a standing ovation. It wasn't just because of his celebrity status, but because of the authenticity and urgency in his message. People in the audience began to ask themselves tough questions about their own roles in society. Were they truly using their influence to drive positive change, or were they simply content with maintaining the status quo?